So about 3 weeks ago, I made a video talking about my top 5 largemouth baits for the springtime. But as the water temps start to warm up, as the spring starts to set in, I'm getting the itch to go smallmouth fishing. So I pretty much rigged up all my smallmouth stuff. So in today's video, I'm going to break down my top 5 baits to go out and chase smallmouth bass this spring. Now the first bait that I want to talk about is my go-to for covering water. It's my go-to bait when I'm just looking for bites, and this is something I have a ton of confidence that fish will bite, kind of regardless of where I'm fishing, in differing water clarities. And that is going to be a small-bodied paddle tail swim bait. Now this paddle tail I actually used quite a bit last fall and caught a bunch of fish, but this is a bait that I know fish are going to eat regardless of where I'm fishing. Anywhere that there are smallmouth bass, they will eat a paddle tail swim bait. The other reason that I really like a paddle tail is that it's super versatile in the sense that you can fish it up in the column or you can fish it down along the bottom. Now, especially with spring pushing in, these fish are you still have some fish deep, you have some fish pushing up shallow, and you need baits that you can do a bunch of different things with. And for me, a swim bait really fits into that versatility category that's going to go out and help me cover water and locate where the biggest pods and biggest bass are currently setting up on my bodies of water. So the swim bait that I have right here is a Beast Coast slow flow swim bait. This is the smaller 2.8 size. If I'm going out in cleaner water situations where fish can see the bait from a long ways away, I like to go with that smaller size. And then I have that rigged up on an Ashine 3/8 ounce head. This to me is like more of a deeper water head. If I'm fishing in shallower water, especially with a smaller body swim bait like this, I'm going to typically around a 1/8 of an ounce. The reason that's really important, that 3/8 of an ounce, especially on a spinning setup with light line, you can fish it along bottom in deep water. But as you push up into the shallows, you're going to want to go to a head that's not necessarily dredging bottom quite as hard. That 1/8 of an ounce, if you're less than about 8 to 10 foot of water, you can pretty much fish effectively. And then anything deeper than about 10 foot, I like to kind of bump up to a quarter or even a 3/8, depending on how much wind there is. So for me, that is one of my go-to baits early in the spring. Now, if you do face some off-color water, if the water is dirty, I'll kind of start by changing the color of my swim bait, go to more of a green pumpkin, a darker base color, as well as going to a bigger body swim bait, like the 4-inch slow flow, or I'll put on like an Excite Baits, Shad Nasty, a bigger body, boot tail, like big, hard kicking swim bait. It's going to allow those fish to kind of get a feel for that bait in that off-color water and come find it a little bit better than this smaller 2.8 size. The reason I like this bait is because it does kick at such slow speeds. So the slow flow, really the key here is that you can creep it as slow as you want, and that tail's going to kick and it's going to move. And you can also burn this bait, and it's going to have, again, still a good swimming action. Then the rod that I'm throwing that on is a TFO Professional series. This is a 7/6 medium. I like that 7/6. You can really bomb the bait away from the boat, and that medium just helps drive that hook home when the fish bites in deep water. Pretty much this is what I'm going to be going to, unless I'm going less than probably 3/16 of an ounce, and then I'm going to go to like a 7/6 medium light. The reason that's key is just being able to get that long cast the distance away from you. Now looking at bait number 2, again, I'm talking about covering water. I'm talking about versatile baits that I can do a bunch of things with. I'm going to be picking up a Lipless crankbait. Anyone that's followed the channel for quite some time, probably the last 4 or 5 years, knows that I love a Lipless, not only for largemouth, but it's a phenomenal search tool for smallmouth. For me, really, again, versatility. It's a bait that I can fish up in the water column. It looks like a bait fish. It has a drawing power because of the rattles as well as the action coming through the water. But it can also be fished really effectively down along bottom with slow hops and pulls. Kind of depending on the mood of those fish, depending on where they're located, you can really dial in your approach with the Lipless to trigger fish to bite. Now this Lipless here is actually a Duo Realis Vibe 68. This is the G-Fix model, so it's about 2 3/4 inches. It's about 5/8 of an ounce. And so this bait will stay on bottom really effectively like a blade bait, but you get the benefit of a rattle. So it's going to fall really fast. It's going to be able to fish along bottom really effectively. And that rattle is going to help call fish in. I really like a Lipless bait when I'm fishing in dirtier water, off-color water situations, but you can go to like a translucent color like I have here, this Ghost Gill, and still fish it effectively, even in clean water situations. especially a long bottom. It's going to drive fish crazy. You're going to catch a bunch of fish on a lipless bait. So for me, this G-Fix 68 is one of my favorites. Another one that I like is LV500. I really like a Spro Uruku Shad Jr. Those are some of definitely my favorite smallmouth lipless crankbaits, as well as a couple others. I'll have them all linked down in the description below for you to check out. Then the rod that I'm throwing that on is a brand new TFO Taction series. They call this a moving bait rod. It's actually, this is just the Taction series 7'3" medium. I like the 7'3" medium as opposed to their 7'4" medium heavy, just because it's a little bit softer, but it still has enough power for me to drive the hooks home when I'm fishing a lipless bait, especially without overpowering the bait in colder water situations. Like, I'm not overfishing that bait. I can really work this bait effectively. It's a full graphite rod as opposed to a composite, so you can feel what that bait's doing down there along bottom. Still get a really good positive hook to land ratio with this 7'3" medium. And I've really enjoyed fishing this rod this season. It's a little bit of a deviation from the rod that I've used in the past, which is a composite. And I like the extra feel that you get. But then by downsizing, I guess, to go to a medium as opposed to a medium heavy, you're still able to keep those fish pinned. It's still a softer rod than a traditional 7'4". And then I'm fishing it on a 7 speed gear ratio bait cast reel with 14-pound test fluorocarbon line. The next bait in the setup is another bait casting rod. You can fish this bait on a spinning rod if you like, but for me it's pretty much been on a bait caster over the past 8 years since I started using this technique, and that is a jerkbait. A jerkbait for me is probably one of the most fun ways to catch them in the springtime. The thing is, once you get on a jerkbait, they seem to be on a jerkbait pretty much through the entirety of the pre-spawn until they push up on the bed. So I love a jerkbait. It catches a bunch of fish. It is so unique in the way that you can fish this thing and present the bait to fish that it just triggers so many bites in the springtime. Now this bait here is a KVD Deep 300. This is a bait that my buddy Nathan and myself have played with over the past 7-ish years and had a ton of success. Now this one's the perch color, but really the way that I'm going to pick the jerkbait is going to be depending on the conditions that I'm fishing. Another really good one is a Berkeley Stunna, Jacko Re-Range. The Duo Realis 100 SP is a really phenomenal jerkbait as well. There's a lot of great jerkbaits out there. You kind of just have to pick and choose based on the situations you're fishing in. And I'll actually link a jerkbait specific video where I go full in-depth, break down everything I know about jerkbaits, so you guys can check that out. It's going to be linked right next to the product list for the jerkbaits and how I choose the bait that I'm selecting. The rod that I'm throwing that on is a TFO Resolve 7-foot medium. I love a 7-foot rod when I'm jerkbait fishing, especially for smallmouth. Now, one thing TFO does is they have a really short handle on this rod, so it allows you to work that bait effectively. You can get a long cast because it is 7 foot long, and that medium power allows you to kind of work this fish effectively and work the bait effectively. It is more of a moderate bend, a moderate action. I would say moderate fast, so it bends pretty deep into the blank, as opposed to some fast action rods that shut off pretty quick. So you can fight the fish really effectively. You can work the bait really well. It's a very snappy tip, and I just love fishing a jerkbait because you get so many vicious bites. The reel that I'm throwing that on is an 8:1 to 1 gear ratio, and then I'm fishing it on 10-pound test fluorocarbon line. You can go up to 12. I know some guys that fish 12. I just really like 10 because I think it lets that bait get down to maximum depth. And then if you are trying to sink a jerkbait, which is something I do quite a bit, that 10-pound allows you to sink it with a little bit less weight on the bait. So you can kind of dial that in and tweak it based on the conditions you're fishing and how you're fishing that jerkbait. But for me, a jerkbait is definitely one of my go-tos in the springtime. Now the next two baits, I'm not going to say are like runner-ups, but for me, I just really like to power fish and cover water and then kind of pick it apart if I have to with slower moving techniques. Now the first one is a brand new, I would say brand new bait, but not necessarily a new bait category, and that is the Great Lakes Finesse Juvie craw. This is a small 2.5-inch size style tube, so it is a tube style presentation, but it looks like a little craw bait. I love a tube in the springtime. I know a Ned rig still catches fish, but for me a tube is like the go-to. I just think it looks like what those fish are keying in on. It's a little bit bigger presentation as opposed to a Ned rig, which is really, really finesse, really, really slow along bottom. I can fish a tube a little bit more aggressively with a 1/4 or 3/8 ounce head in there and just get a lot of bites. But this Juvie craw is a really unique profile, a really unique presentation as opposed to those standard tubes out there. It's more of a crawfish imitation, and I'm just really excited to play with this thing. But really, really cool tube design. This is in a green pumpkin with an orange belly. I really like that orange belly. Anytime I'm fishing kind of natural style bodies of water where those crawfish have like a reddish hue to their belly. But if I'm fishing around gobies, I like a green pumpkin purple or some sort of just natural green pumpkin base. But any of those normal inland bodies of water, that orange on the belly is just something I have a ton of confidence in. The rod that I'm throwing that on is a TFO Option 7.3 medium. So again, it's a little bit longer rod. I need to get distance between me and that bait. The 7.3 medium allows me to make that long cast, but still kind of drive that hook home from a long distance. So 7.3 medium option bass, then it's a 3,000 size reel. This I believe is 15-pound test braided line to 10-pound test fluorocarbon. When I'm fishing a tube, I'm basically getting that bait on bottom. I don't necessarily need to be super finesse with the line that I'm using, so that 10-pound test is more abrasion resistant, and I don't have to worry about it quite as much as like an 8-pound test leader. I don't think that's necessary when you're fishing a tube, and my buddy Durds, who kicks my butt at tube fishing, has kind of turned me into a believer in that. And then finally, you kind of can't talk about baits anymore, especially for smallmouth where they suspend, without talking about something you can use for forward-facing sonar. And the bait I'm talking about is basically this right here. It's a little minnow imitation. Now this is really my last resort. Like if I can't get fish to go on any of those other presentations, if they're off the break, if it's sunny, those fish are just kind of lethargic and roaming, you really have to go to something really, really finesse. Now this is from my buddy Deke's Tackle, and it is called the roll around head. Woo! What makes this head so unique is a high center of gravity. So you guys might be able to tell right there, but the weight is actually more or less above of the hook, where the hook comes out of that weight. The reason that's important is it gives this bait a hard rocking action side to side. So Deke kind of custom makes these baits. It's a really, really unique jig head, and that rocking action gives that bait flash, and when you shake that bait is what triggers a lot of fish to bite. A lot of guys are using this technique. If you guys watch the Top Professional series, a lot of these guys, you're going to see them shaking that bait. The reason that's important is they're fishing a jig head similar to this, and it rocks really hard, and that gives that bait flash. It looks like a little minnow or bait fish coming through the water column, and that's what triggers those fish to bite. Now, the size that I'm fishing is 3/16 of an ounce, especially for smallmouth. I like to go to that little bit bigger size head. It allows me to fish that bait a little bit faster. For me, 3/16 is sort of that sweet zone where I can get that bait down, but I'm not like overworking it through those fish. And then the bait I have rigged on the back of there is actually a Fish Arrow Flash J. I have very limited experience with this, but I bought this like 8 or 10 years ago. Like I've just had this sitting in my boat for a really, really long time. It looks really good. It's got flat sides. It's just going to flash really hard. It's just a really kind of good bait fish imitation for those perch or little smelt feeders or those fish that are keyed on a small bait fish up in the water column. There's a bunch of other great options. The Rapala freeloaders out there is a really good option. I've done this with just straight Ned rig style baits like a hula craw or hula grub or hula sticks, whatever from Z-Man. Ton of really good options out there. I mean, for me, I don't love this technique, but mid-strolling is a phenomenal way to catch fish that are very lethargic. You can even do it with a really small body swim bait, like a 3-inch style swim bait. Just creep it by those fish, but slowly fishing a bait off of the break when those fish are suspended up in the water column is a great way to catch fish. So you got to have it rigged up now. Hate to tell you guys, but it's got to be on the deck of your boat if you're fishing for smallmouth and you know they're sort of suspending and kind of being lethargic out there on the water. The rod that I'm fishing that on is a TFO Resolve. It's a 7.3 medium light plus. So it's a little bit stiffer than a medium light, but it's not quite as stiff as like a traditional medium. It's sort of the in-between. Again, 7'3" length. Now this is really a high-end rod. If you guys are looking for just a great rod, like a 7-foot medium light to medium is a great rod for this setup. And then 3,000 size reel. I'm fishing 10-pound test braided line to 8-pound test fluorocarbon. I don't know that you need to go really, really finesse. You can if you'd like, but for me, it's all about the action of that bait and getting it where those fish live, slowly fishing it back. If you guys want to check out a full mid-strolling video, I'll have a link down in the description below, again, next to the bait selection that I'm using, where you guys can check out kind of my mid-strolling breakdown and how you guys can use it to catch fish. Anytime you're using that mid-strolling or hover rigging technique, whatever you want to call it. But those are my top 5 baits for catching smallmouth bass. There's a bunch of great ways to catch them. Outside of these, I'd love to know what you guys are doing in the springtime to catch smallmouth. If I missed a technique, let me know down in the comment section down below. If you're not already subscribed, be sure to subscribe. Hit that notification bell because it'll let you know when I post more videos just like this one. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Take care, tight lines. God bless. Pursue your passion.